everyone. Welcome to another deep dive. So today, we're going to be taking a look at Give and Take by Adam Grant. It's a really fascinating book, and I'm really excited to kind of unpack it and, I guess, explore some of the ideas with you.
Yeah, for sure. It's it's one of those books that really kind of changes the way you think about success and how we achieve it, and how we interact with other people.
For me, it was like one of those, it was a real paradigm shift. Because,
Yeah.
I think going into it, I was kind of expecting another, self-help book telling me to be, super altruistic and, saintly. But Grant actually backs up all of his ideas with a ton of research and real-world examples and shows how giving can actually be a path to success,
Right.
even in really, competitive fields like venture capital or, the corporate world.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's not just some kind of, hippy-dippy philosophy. It's
Right.
like he's really looking at the data, and he's finding that there's a lot of evidence to support this idea that being a giver can actually help you achieve your goals.
Yeah, totally. And he kind of breaks this whole giving thing down into three main styles of reciprocity. So you've got the givers, the takers, and the matchers. And when I first heard about this, I was like, oh, okay, I kind of get it. But then as I really got into the book, I was like, oh, wow, this is actually a lot more nuanced than I initially thought.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that Grant does really well, he uses these really vivid examples to illustrate each of these styles. So, for example, with givers, he talks about Adam Rifkin.
Oh, yeah.
Who's this super successful venture capitalist.
Yeah.
And Rifkin is known for having this massive network. But it's not just about collecting names or trying to use people. Rifkin genuinely just wants to help people.
Right.
He connects them. He offers advice. He's like, the textbook definition of a giver.
And it seems like he's been incredibly successful doing that. It's almost like he's planting seeds that grow into this thriving forest of connections. Do you think that's part of what makes him so successful? Maybe it's not just about picking winners, but about creating an ecosystem where everyone can thrive.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Rifkin's approach really challenges the traditional venture capital model, which can be very transactional. It's all about what's the ROI? How quickly can I get my money back?
Right, what's the bottom line here?
Exactly. But Rifkin seems to understand that. By investing in people and fostering a sense of community, he's ultimately creating more value for everyone involved, including himself.
It's like a longer-term play.
Yeah.
He's not just looking for the quick win.
Yes, yeah.
He's playing the long game.
Right.
And it seems to be paying off.
Yeah, and that's one of the key takeaways from the book is that givers often do succeed.
Yeah.
But it's not always immediate. It's often in the long run that they really reap the rewards.
Yeah. But, Grant doesn't just paint this, rosy picture of givers always winning. He also acknowledges that givers can get burned, especially when they encounter those takers. And he uses the example of Ken Lay at Enron.
Yeah, Lay is the classic example of a taker. He was this charismatic leader, but his focus was ultimately on personal gain. And that self-serving mentality ultimately led to Enron's collapse, which had devastating consequences for a lot of people.
It's like a cautionary tale about what can happen when the balance of reciprocity tips too far in one direction.
Yeah, it's like he was playing a zero-sum game.
Right.
Where his wins meant that other people had to lose.
And then, of course, we have the matchers.
Yeah.
The you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of folks. Where do they fit into all of this?
Yeah, matchers are all about fairness. They want to make sure that contributions are reciprocated. They're not necessarily trying to take advantage of people.
Right.
But they also don't want to be taken advantage of.
Right.
So they're always trying to strike that balance.
It's like they're keeping score. Yeah, in a way.
But not in a negative way. Just making sure things are even.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we've got these three styles: givers, takers, and matchers. Here's what I found really interesting. Grant's research shows that givers are overrepresented at both the top and the bottom of the success ladder.
Wait, so
how does that even work?
It seems counterintuitive, right? But when you think about it, it actually makes sense. Because givers often prioritize others' needs above their own.
Right.
So if they're surrounded by people who reciprocate and value their contributions, they can achieve incredible success. But if they're surrounded by takers, they can be easily exploited.
So it's like there's this tightrope walk for givers.
Yeah.
They have the potential to reach incredible heights.
Right.
But they also need to be savvy and protect themselves from being taken advantage of.
Yeah.
So what are some of the ways givers can navigate this tightrope?
Well, Grant offers several strategies. And one that particularly resonated with me is the idea of otherish giving.
Otherish giving.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm intrigued. It's kind of a funny term.
Yeah.
But it's basically about finding a balance between giving generously and recognizing your own needs. It's not about self-sacrifice. It's about finding ways to give that benefit both yourself and others.
So it's like strategic giving.
Exactly.
Not just like saying yes to every request,
Right.
but being more intentional
Yeah.
with your giving.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the research on the 100-hour rule,
Well,
where volunteering up to 100 hours per year is linked to all these positive outcomes. But exceeding that limit can actually lead to burnout.
Right. So it's like finding that sweet spot where your
Microeconomics.
giving is sustainable and energizing rather than draining.
And this is where things get really interesting. Grant argues that sometimes a less assertive communication style can be surprisingly effective, particularly for givers.
Really?
Yeah.
So you tell me that being less assertive can actually help you succeed.
It sounds counterintuitive,
It does.
but there's a lot of research to support it. And Grant calls this style of communication powerless communication.
Okay.
And it involves things like asking questions, expressing vulnerability, seeking advice.
So it's not about coming across as the know-it-all, but about creating space for collaboration.
Exactly.
And building trust.
And it can be very disarming
I can see that.
because you're not coming across as like, I have all the answers. You're coming across as someone who's genuinely interested in learning and collaborating.
It's interesting because I think we're often told to project confidence and to be assertive, especially in a professional setting. But Grant's research suggests that there's a lot of power in humility and in being willing to admit when you don't know something.
And there's actually research to back this up. Like one study found that people who use powerless communication are often perceived as more trustworthy.
Interesting.
Michael.
Yeah, because I think sometimes when people are super assertive, it can come across as arrogant or even aggressive. So it's like finding that balance between being confident but also approachable.
And I think someone like Don Lane, the advertising executive, is a good example of this in action.
Oh, yeah. He was known for his collaborative style.
Yeah, he really empowered his teams and prioritized their success, even if it meant putting his own ego aside.
Right. Like he wasn't afraid to share the credit.
Exactly.
Or to give others the spotlight.
And it ultimately led to his success.
So I guess what we're seeing here is that giving isn't about being a pushover.
Right.
It's about being strategic and finding ways to empower both yourself and others.
And that brings us to another interesting point, which is how givers can become more effective negotiators.
Okay, because that seems like a challenge. If you're naturally inclined to put others' needs first.
It can be tricky.
Yeah.
But Grant offers some really fascinating insights. He talks about this phenomenon called the advocacy paradox.
Oh, yeah.
Which shows that women are often more assertive and successful negotiators when they're advocating for others rather than themselves.
Like they can tap into this other level of confidence and conviction when they're fighting for someone else's cause.
Exactly. And Grant actually shares a story about a guy named Samir that was a natural giver, but struggled to negotiate for himself. But when he reframed his salary negotiation as advocating for his family's needs, he was able to secure a much better deal.
Wow. So it's like that shift in perspective from me to us.
Exactly.
Unlocked his advocacy superpowers.
And it really highlights the power of perspective taking, which is something Grant emphasizes throughout the book.
Like if we can understand the other party's needs and find ways to create value for them, negotiation becomes less about winning and more about finding solutions that work for everyone.
It's about expanding the pie. Instead of just fighting over the slices.
Okay, so we've talked about how giving can be a path to success for individuals. But what about creating a culture of giving, especially in competitive environments?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Grant explores this by comparing two very different online platforms, FreeCycle and Craigslist.
Okay.
And he found that FreeCycle, which is all about giving away unwanted items for free, tends to foster a culture of generosity. Whereas Craigslist, which is more about buying and selling, often attracts a more transactional mindset.
So it's like the very structure of the platform
Yeah.
influences the behavior of the users.
Exactly.
It's like if you want to encourage giving,
Right.
you need to design environments that reward and celebrate generosity.
And one way to do that is through initiatives, like the reciprocity ring.
Okay, I've heard of that. What exactly is a reciprocity ring?
So it's basically a facilitated activity where people come together and make requests. It could be anything from needing help with a project to wanting recommendations for a good plumber.
Okay.
And then everyone in the group looks for ways that they can help fulfill those requests.
Interesting.
So it's like you're creating this microcosm of the culture that Grant is advocating for.
Yeah, like a little giving ecosystem.
Exactly.
A really cool idea.
And it's been shown to be really effective
Yeah.
in fostering giving behavior.
But how do we make this kind of giving sustainable in the long run, especially for givers who might be prone to burnout?
That's a great question. And it's something that Grant addresses in the book. He talks about the importance of setting boundaries.
Right.
And making sure that you're not overextending yourself.
Yeah, because I think a lot of givers struggle with that. They feel like they have to say yes to everyone, and they end up burning themselves out.
Exactly. And Grant uses the example of Lillian Bauer, who was a successful consultant, but she was constantly being asked for help. And she was having trouble saying no.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
And it was starting to affect her work and her personal life.
So what did she do?
Well, she eventually learned to be more assertive and set clear boundaries, especially when dealing with takers who were trying to exploit her generosity.
Yeah.
And it allowed her to focus her energy on the people who genuinely valued her contributions and were willing to reciprocate.
It's like recognizing your worth.
Yeah.
And not letting people take advantage of your giving nature.
Exactly. And this ties into another important point that Grant raises, which is the need for givers to become more assertive, especially when it comes to advocating for their own interests.
Okay.
And he highlights this fascinating research by Linda Babcock, who's an economist who studied negotiation styles.
Oh, right. She's the one who discovered the advocacy paradox, where women are often more effective negotiators when they're advocating for someone else rather than themselves.
And it seems counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But it really speaks to this deep-seated desire that many givers have to help others. They're more comfortable pushing for what they believe in when it benefits someone else.
And does this apply to men as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Grant tells the story of Samir, who we talked about earlier, who was able to negotiate a significant salary increase by framing it as advocating for his family's needs.
Wow. So it's like he tapped into that advocacy power by shifting his perspective from me to us.
Exactly.
And it really emphasizes the importance of understanding the other party's needs and finding ways to create value for them.
And Grant even uses his own experience in selling advertising to illustrate this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he found that by understanding his clients' needs and finding creative ways to meet them, he was able to build stronger relationships and close more deals.
So that's like a win-win.
Exactly.
It's not just about being a good negotiator. It's about being a good partner, a good collaborator.
Right. It's about finding that sweet spot where everyone benefits.
Okay, so we've talked about givers and takers and matchers and how givers can be successful. But what about those who genuinely give without expecting anything in return?
That's a really interesting question. And Grant explores this idea of oneness.
Oneness.
It's this idea that true giving stems from a sense of interconnectedness.
Okay.
Like we're all in this together.
Right.
And we want to help each other. Not because we expect something in return, but because it just feels right.
And he has examples of this in the book.
Yeah, he tells this really heartwarming story about two men, both named Adam Rifkin.
Oh, wow.
Who formed a strong bond based on their shared name and their natural inclination towards giving.
Wow. So it's like they were destined to be givers.
Yeah. It's a really cool story.
It is, but it also seems like a happy coincidence.
Right.
So what about the rest of us who don't have a name twin out there?
Yeah.
How do we cultivate that sense of oneness?
Well, Grant suggests that it starts with recognizing and celebrating givers.
Okay.
Like we need to challenge the societal norms that often make givers feel like they're in the minority.
Like the whole idea that nice guys finish last.
Exactly.
We need to flip that script.
Yeah, and Grant talks about the Love Machine at Linden Lab, which is this peer recognition program where employees can publicly acknowledge and reward each other for acts of giving.
It's a really cool idea. It's like a way to gamify giving.
Yeah, and it makes it more visible and celebrated.
So it's not just this like behind the scenes thing. It's
Yeah.
something that's out in the open.
And it shows that
Yeah.
even small acts of giving can make a big difference.
Right. Like you don't have to, donate $1 million to charity.
Yeah.
To be a giver,
Exactly.
it's the little things
Yeah.
that add up.
And Grant also talks about the importance of leading by example.
Okay.
And he highlights Jim Quigley, the former CEO of Deloitte, who made listening a cornerstone of his leadership style.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he believed that. Truly listening to his employees,
Yeah.
valuing their perspectives,
Yeah.
and creating space for their voices was essential for building a more inclusive and collaborative organization.
So it's like he was embodying that powerless communication that we were talking about earlier. He wasn't afraid to step back and listen and learn from others.
And that's really what give and take is all about, challenging those traditional notions of success and showing that a focus on giving can be a powerful force for positive change.
It's a really inspiring message.
Yeah,
and I
right
think
on.
it's something that we could all benefit from hearing.
Yeah, I agree.
So as we kind of wrap up this part of our deep dive into give and take, I want to leave you with a thought-provoking question. How can you incorporate some of these giving principles, like the 5-minute favor or other-ish giving, into your own life? What small changes could you make that might have a ripple effect?
That's a great question, and one that I think we should all be asking ourselves.
Totally. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue our exploration of give and take with Adam Grant. Stay tuned.
Yeah, it's a great question to think about. And, one of the things that really stood out to me from the book is that, this whole idea of a giving mindset, it's not about being a pushover. It's not about sacrificing your own ambitions. It's actually a strength.
Yeah, that was a big takeaway for me, too. Like, I think we're so conditioned to think that, getting ahead means, looking out for number one. But, Grant's research shows that focusing on helping others can actually be a more fulfilling and effective path to success.
Yeah, it's like flipping the script.
Yeah.
Like instead of seeing giving as this like weakness, this thing that's going to hold you back, you start to see it as an asset.
And it makes sense when you think about it, right? Like our success is often intertwined with the success of others. So when we help others succeed, we're ultimately creating a more supportive and collaborative environment that benefits everyone.
Right. And it's not just about like, those big splashy gestures, like donating a ton of money or, whatever. It's really about those small everyday acts of kindness and generosity.
Right. It's about making it a habit, a way of life.
Yeah, exactly. Like just being more mindful of how we can help others, even in small ways.
And Grant actually gives a really cool example of this in the book.
Oh, yeah. What was it?
It was the story of Jason Geller, who's the senior manager who is constantly being asked for help by all these junior analysts.
Oh, yeah. I remember that one.
So instead of trying to do it all himself, which would have been totally overwhelming, he started inviting these newer managers to join him in like these mentoring sessions.
That's so smart.
Right. So he created this win-win-win situation. Like the junior analysts got the guidance they needed. The newer managers got this valuable experience. And Geller was able to delegate some of the workload while still being a giver.
Yeah. Like he found this really clever way to leverage his giving to benefit everyone.
And he was teaching these newer managers how to be givers themselves. So it's like creating this sustainable cycle.
Right. It's not just about one person doing all the giving. It's about building a culture of giving within the organization.
But one thing that I think a lot of givers struggle with is setting boundaries.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's so easy to get caught up in wanting to help everyone, and then you end up overcommitting yourself and burning out.
Totally. And Grant actually talks about this in the book. He uses the example of Lillian Bauer, who was this really successful consultant.
Right. I remember her. She was amazing at what she did, but she had trouble saying no to people.
And it was starting to take a toll on her.
Yeah, she was working crazy hours. She was stressed out. She wasn't taking care of herself.
So what does she do?
Well, she eventually realized that she needed to set some boundaries. She had to start saying no to some requests, especially those that were coming from takers who were just trying to exploit her generosity.
It's like she had to learn to protect her energy.
Right, and it wasn't easy at first, but she eventually got the hang of it, and it allowed her to focus her giving on the people who genuinely valued her contributions and were willing to reciprocate.
So it's not about being selfish, it's about being strategic with your giving.
Exactly. It's about making sure that your giving is sustainable so that you can keep giving in the long run.
And, speaking of being strategic, Grant also talks about how givers can become more effective negotiators, which seems kind of counterintuitive, right? Like if you're naturally inclined to put others' needs first.
Yeah, it can be a tricky
Yeah.
balance, but Grant offers some really interesting insights. Like he talks about this research by Linda Babcock, who studied negotiation styles.
Oh, right. She's the one who discovered the advocacy paradox, where women are often more effective negotiators when they're advocating for someone else rather than themselves.
Yes, exactly. And it's like they can tap into this other level of confidence and conviction when they're fighting for someone else's cause.
And this applies to men as well, right?
Absolutely.
Huh.
Grant shares the story of Samir, who was a natural giver, but he always struggled to negotiate for himself. He felt uncomfortable asking for more money or a better deal.
Yeah, I think a lot of givers can relate to that.
But then he realized that he could reframe his negotiation as advocating for his family's needs. Like he was fighting for them, not just for himself.
And that made a huge difference.
Yeah, he was able to secure a much better deal because he was able to tap into that advocacy power.
That's so cool.
And it really highlights the power of perspective taking. Like if we can shift our focus from me to us, we can often achieve better outcomes for everyone involved.
Right. It's about finding that common ground, that shared interest that can motivate both parties to come to an agreement that benefits everyone.
And Grant actually talks about his own experience in selling advertising to illustrate this. He found that by understanding his clients' needs and finding creative ways to meet them, he was actually able to close more deals.
So it's not just about being like a smooth talker or, using some kind of manipulative tactics.
Right. It's about genuinely wanting to help the other person
Yeah.
and finding ways to create value for them.
And I think that's a really powerful message. Like it's not about being a giver or a taker. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected and that our success is often tied to the success of others.
And that brings us to something else that Grant points out, which is that even takers and matchers are motivated to give when they see the potential for personal benefit.
Okay, that makes sense. Like it speaks to that fundamental human desire for reciprocity.
Right. Like we're all wired to want to give back when someone does something nice for us.
But what about those people who genuinely give without expecting anything in return? Like, is there something deeper going on there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Grant explores this idea of oneness, where true giving stems from a sense of interconnectedness. Like we're all in this together and we want to help each other, not because we expect something in return, but because it just feels right.
Okay, so it's like a more altruistic form of giving.
Yeah, exactly. It's not about the transaction, it's about the connection.
And he has examples of this in the book.
Oh yeah, he tells this heartwarming story about two men, both named Adam Rifkin.
No way.
Yeah, and they formed this strong bond based on their shared name and their natural inclination towards giving.
Wow, so it's like they were destined to be givers.
In a really cool story.
It is, but it also seems like a happy coincidence.
Right.
So what about the rest of us who don't have a name twin out there? How do we cultivate that sense of oneness?
Well, Grant suggests that it starts with recognizing and celebrating givers. Like we need to challenge those societal norms that often make givers feel like they're in the minority, like the whole nice guys finish last thing.
Right. We need to flip that script.
Yeah. And Grant talks about the love machine at Linden Lab.
Oh, yeah, that was a cool example.
It's this peer recognition program where employees can publicly acknowledge and reward each other for acts of giving.
I love that idea. It's like a way to gamify giving.
Yeah, and it makes it more visible and celebrated.
So it's not just this like behind the scenes thing.
Exactly. It's something that's out in the open, and it encourages others to do the same.
And it shows that even small acts of giving can make a big difference.
Right. Like you don't have to donate $1 million to charity to be a giver. It's the little things that add up.
Totally. And Grant also talks about the importance of leading by example. And he highlights Jim Quigley, the former CEO of Deloitte.
Right. Quigley was really big on listening. He believed that truly listening to his employees, valuing their perspectives and creating space for their voices was essential for building a more inclusive and collaborative organization.
So it's like he was embodying that powerless communication we were talking about earlier. He wasn't afraid to step back and listen and learn from others.
Exactly. And that's really what give and take is all about. Challenging those traditional notions of success and showing that a focus on giving can be a powerful force for positive change.
It's been a really insightful discussion, this deep dive into give and take. I think we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, we have. And I think there's still so much more to explore.
Absolutely. But for now, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking question. As we wrap up this deep dive into give and take, Think about this. How can you incorporate some of these giving principles into your own life? Such a good question. And, it's not about like completely overhauling your life or anything. It's really about making small changes.
Yeah, little things.
Yeah, like what's one small thing you could do today to be a little bit more of a giver?
Right. It could be something as simple as, offering to help a colleague with a project or, just listening to a friend who's going through a tough time.
Exactly. Or, maybe you see someone struggling with their groceries, you could offer to help them carry them to their car.
Or like, leaving a nice comment on someone's blog post or social media post.
Yeah, those little things can really make a difference.
And I think that's what's so cool about Give and Take is that it gives us all these practical tips and strategies for how to be more giving in our everyday lives.
It's not just this like abstract philosophical concept.
Right. It's something that we can actually put into practice.
And it's not just about being nice to people. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected and that our success is often tied to the success of others.
So by helping others, we're ultimately helping ourselves.
Exactly.
It's like this virtuous cycle.
Yeah.
The more we give, more we get back.
And it's not just about the material rewards either. It's about the feeling of satisfaction and fulfillment that comes from knowing that you've made a positive impact on someone else's life.
Yeah, there's something really powerful about that.
So I guess the takeaway here is that giving is not just good for others, it's good for us too.
Absolutely. It's a win-win.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive into give and take.
Yeah, it's been a really insightful conversation.
Big thanks to Adam Grant for writing such a thought-provoking and inspiring book.
And for challenging us to rethink our approach to success.
Absolutely. And to all of you listening out there, we hope this episode has inspired you to think about how you can incorporate more giving into your own life.
Remember, even small acts of kindness can make a big difference.
So go out there and be a giver.
See what happens.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.